So if the speed of light was thousands of times faster, then that means that that energy between our neurons would have been going thousands of times faster, meaning our thoughts would have been thousands of times faster. We would have had much faster brains. Our perceptions would have been much greater. So maybe this is why the ancient people believed in the so-called gods, the Elohim. Could it be that because their brains were so much faster than ours that they were able to perceive them in a way that we cannot? And could it be maybe the reason that we don't experience the supernatural in the way the ancient people did is not because the supernatural isn't happening, but maybe it's just because we can't perceive it because our brains are much slower. We always have this idea that the ancients were, dumb. They were, knuckle dragging, troglodytes. But I think it's the opposite. I think they were much smarter than us.
Aloha and welcome to another show, guys. Today we're diving into an incredible topic with a guest who's known for tackling profound questions and making us rethink what we thought we knew. Joining us is Ed Mabrie, the mind behind Faith by Reason, where he explores deep, thought-provoking issues through the lens of theology and logic. Today, Ed will be sharing his insights on the speed of light, not just as a scientific concept, but how it connects to bigger questions about existence, the universe, and even faith. It's going to be a fascinating conversation, guys, so be sure to follow, subscribe, and share this episode with anyone who loves exploring the mysteries of our world. Now, without further ado, let's welcome Ed Mabrie to the show. Aloha and welcome to the show. It's
Thank you.
great to have you here. I looked through your website, the work that you do on Faith by Reason, and it tackles some of life's biggest questions. So I'm really looking forward to diving into your thoughts on the speed of light and how it affects our perspective on spiritual realm. But before we get started, I'd like to know a little bit about you and what led you to explore such profound questions and create this platform, Faith by Reason.
Yeah, so I started, I grew up in a church. I was in church all my life. My grandmother was the matriarch of our church. She literally helped build it from the ground up. And so I was always there. So I was always been immersed in my faith in Christianity. But I was always been very inquisitive. I still am to this day. That is my thing. I always ask why. In fact, if you ask my parents what my first words, they would say your words were why. Why is this? Why is that? So I always want to know that. So I would always ask questions about the Bible, about the stories I would hear when I was a kid. Why did God flood the earth? How was Jesus born from a virgin? Why did God make us? How did he make us? What does he want from us? And all these sorts of things. And I think the pastors kind of got tired of me always asking questions. So they basically said, well, it's not right to question God. I'm like, oh, well, okay, I don't want to make God bad. So I guess I'll just stop asking questions. And so I essentially just went through my youth, adolescence, not asking those questions. And that was okay until I got to college. When you get to college, go to a secular college, and I found there was like some open hostility to my faith. There were some professors and even some other students who took great delight in deconstructing the faith because once you get there, the idea is that if you're an intellectual, if you are a deep thinker, if you have a scientific mind, well, then you have to reject all of this so-called mythology and all these things that people make up, all the whole spiritual world, and just deal with hard facts and hard science. When I first got to college, I was pre-med. I wanted to be a doctor at the time, so I'm taking biology classes. And my first biology class, my professor said, oh, I think first or second day, he's like, blah, 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 evolution. And by the way, evolution is true. And if you don't believe it, then get out of my class. Creation, all that other stuff is a myth. And I'm like, wow, okay. So during that time, during my years in college, as I said, they would take great delight in deconstructing my faith. I would take a history class, and the professor would tell me, hey, you can't rely on the Bible. It's historically inaccurate. It was basically made up by these people who were just trying to understand their world, and they just created these gods, God and the gods, to help them understand the world, and there either was no Jesus or he wasn't who he said he was, and all these things are just stories. He's not reliable. So when I left college, my faith was challenged. I still believed in God, but I started to question what I was taught about him because I just didn't know. I was never taught how to defend my faith. So I went on a journey and of trying to understand truth. I just want to know truth. Whether if what I believe wasn't true, okay, fine. I want to know truth. I want to live in reality. But again, I still believe in the supernatural creator. I just couldn't buy into the idea that the universe created itself. That just didn't make any sense to me. That life could come from non-life. That's not provable. And I get into a whole thing on evolution, on faith by reason. But yeah, life can't come from non-life. That's impossible. So where did this come from? How, who is God, and why did he make us? Why does he do what he does? And I basically had a prayer, and I said, God, if you're real, then you should conform to reality. You should conform to logic and reason. There should not be a divorce between logic and reason. And he answered that prayer by bringing information and people into my life who basically showed me how my faith actually does make sense with logic and reason and systematic analysis. And that's what I do. And so, long story short, I know that there are probably other people who are on that same journey, who are educated, who are thinkers, who have been challenged and maybe even feel a little bit embarrassed by, the miraculous and the spiritual. And what I want to help them understand is your faith makes sense. God is not unknowable. He actually is knowable. Not only is he knowable, he wants to be known. He delights in being known. Why would you create other intelligent, sentient beings for any reason other than for them to get to know you and for you to know them? And that's really the basis of it. And I just want to, strengthen the faith of my fellow believers.
That's awesome. Yeah, and I think that's a good segue to this light, speed of light that you're talking about.
Yeah, so let me back up and give it a little bit of physics, very light physics, because what I want to do, I want to kind of take us on a journey to get uh, to where I want us to go in understanding the speed of light, what its effects are on the spiritual realm and our perception of it. So let's start with like just a basic building block of life we've all learned about in school, the atom. So we see the model of the atom made by Niels Bohr, where you see, the nucleus, which is, the center made of protons and neutrons, and then circling around it would be electrons. Now, if you look at the models in our textbooks, that electron or those electrons are circling maybe about an inch away from the nucleus. Of course, it's out of proportion, but the problem is those proportions are way, way off. In fact, there's about 100,000 to 1 ratio between the space between of the space between the nucleus and those orbiting electrons. So, for example, if you were to take a pin and put a dot at the 50-yard line of a football field, the electrons will be circling through each end zone. That's a huge amount of space where there's nothing happening there. If you were able to enlarge that nucleus to the size of a baseball, the electrons will be orbiting 7 miles away. So 99.9% of what we consider our material world of atoms is mostly nothing. It's empty space. There's just nothing there. So you look at the components of what makes up the atom, the electron. The electron itself that's spinning around, the weight of the electron is pretty much inferred by its motion. You could argue that electrons are virtually weightless. They're just energy. They're light. So then you get to the nucleus. Now you do actually have weight there. The protons and the neutrons, they do have actual weight. That's where we get the atomic weight of all of our elements. But when you get down to what creates the protons, you have these elements called quarks. They're on the quantum level. Quarks are, when you get down to it, quarks are basically vibrations. There are 3 quarks in each proton, and they're too small. I mean, we're talking very, very tiny particles. They're so small they don't have any color to them. They don't have any light because they're that small. They're vibrations. So what does that tell us? That tells us that everything that we see is made up of atoms. These atoms are 99.9% nothing. The only part of them that actually have any substance, when you get down to them, they're just vibrations. So you could basically say that our world doesn't really exist physically. we are actually in an electric simulation. So if that's the case, why are things solid? Why is this table in front of me solid? Why is this chair I'm sitting on? Why don't I fall through it? Well, because those electrons, as they spin around the atom, they create an electric field. And that electric field gives us the illusion of solidity. Like, when you were a kid, you were playing with magnets. You put them together, they stick. But if you were to turn one magnet over and try to make them stick, well, you can't. That's like a physical force there. That's an electric field. So, but that's just one magnet. Imagine that same electric field, but you have trillions and trillions of atoms. Well, that electric field is going to be so strong that one can't pass through the other. That's why when I'm sitting in this chair, my butt doesn't pass through it, because the trillions of electrons in my butt repel the trillions of electrons in the chair I'm sitting on, and I can't pass through it. So we basically have the illusion of solidity in our material world. We are essentially like I said, we're in an electronic simulation. We live in a holographic universe. There's an entire field of study in physics called the holographic universe, because yeah, when you get down to the quantum level, it's not really real. Even protons are. You may have heard of the famous experiment with Schrodinger's cat, where the experiment is basically, if you it's a hypothetical, where if you were to take a cat and put it into a box with a vial of poison in the box, but it's sealed, and you were able, and there was a couple of slits in the box that you could fire a proton into, and there's an equal chance of the proton hitting that glass and that vial and breaking open and killing the cat. Sorry for any of the cat lovers listening. Or there's also an equal chance of it missing the vial. So the question is, when you fire a proton into the box, is the cat alive or dead? Well, the truth is, it's neither alive or dead until you observe it. Basically, protons only exist when they're being observed. So again, the atom is mostly nothing. The electron is weightless. The proton is made of vibrations, and that proton, the only thing you can definitively say about it is that it exists only when someone is observing it. So again, our world is not real. We are in a simulation. If you're in a simulation, what are we simulating is the question. If you remember the movie The Matrix, that was a movie about a simulation. It was the movie the world that looked like the real world, that Neo was in the first part of the movie, was a simulation. It was a simulation of a greater world outside of it. So if our world is a simulation, then again, there has to be something greater that we are simulating. And I believe that greater thing we're simulating is the spiritual realm, that the spiritual realm is the real realm. And what we experience here is a fake or lighter realm. And I'll give you an example of what I mean by that, but I want to make sure you have a chance to talk before I keep monopolizing the
Yeah.
conversation.
No, no, no. That's awesome. Yeah, no, that's very interesting. I spoke to a guest maybe a few months ago about simulation.
Mhm.
That's incredible. And he mentioned the same thing about what you said about the double slit theory, and it only moves when you observe it.
Right.
That's incredible.
So if you look at it on a grand scale, we get to the God aspect of it. When we say that God is omnipresent, the universe exists because he's observing it. And he's omnipresent because when you get down to quantum physics, things get really, really really fanciful. I mean, but they're all measurable, and they're, it's obviously a field of science that many serious scientists are into, but things get really crazy. In fact, there's an idea that every proton in the universe knows what every other proton is doing.
That's
that,
incredible.
that there's that everything is connected on that subatomic level, which again explains being omnipresent. If God created all the protons, and all the protons know what every other proton is doing, then that's how God can simultaneously interact with everyone at once. Tough to wrap our minds around, but when you get down to the quantum level, things really, really get very, very interesting.
Wow. I think if you understand quantum physics, just a little bit what you're explaining, I think you can understand it a little bit better.
Yeah. So
Okay.
so again, my supposition is that the spiritual realm is the real realm, and we are a simulation of it. That is the inverse of the way we think of the spiritual realm versus our material realm. We really think it's the other way around. We think that our realm is the real solid realm, this table in front of me that I'm knocking on. Well, that's real. But the spiritual realm, it's ethereal, it's not substantive, it's kind of fluffy and out there. It's like just something that again, not real. So if a spiritual entity were to enter into our physical realm, we would think, well, they have to become more real in order for us to interact with them. But it's just the opposite. They have to become less real. And an example I give is, think about the last time you were in an airplane, you were flying above the clouds. You look out the window, you see these big fluffy clouds. You would think just by looking at them, if you were to jump out of the airplane and land on one of these clouds, you would, bounce around a little bit and it would just sink into this, fluffy, comfortable cloud. But we know that's not the case. It's water vapor, and we would fall right through because we are just that much denser than these clouds, even though they look solid and real. In order for you to be able to exist on that cloud and not fall through, we have to somehow be able to decrease our density to be either the same as or a little less than the cloud. It's the same thing with the spiritual realm. When a spiritual being, an angel, or more accurately, an Elohim, that's really angel comes from the Greek word angelos, which just means messenger. That's a job description. Elohim is a designation of residency. If you reside in the spiritual realm, you are an Elohim. If you reside in the physical realm, the Bible calls you man. So
Oh,
that's
neat.
right. So that's why I prefer to call them Elohim, because again, they're not all messengers. They have different roles. But if an Elohim were to materialize in our world, he doesn't become more solid. He has to become less solid. He has to become less substantial in order for us to interact with him, because we're like the fluffy clouds. So
That's so
that's
weird.
that's the analogy that I like to give. And so because again, the spiritual realm is a real realm. Ours isn't, because ours technically has no substance. And I'm going to get to the speed of light thing in just a moment. But what I what I like to well, I'm going to give a supposition that what the spiritual realm actually is consciousness and energy.
Okay.
Okay. So let's get to the speed of light, and then I'll bring it back to what we're talking about with the spiritual realm. So up until the 1600s, the consensus of scientists was that the speed of light was instant and infinite. That it didn't have a discrete speed. That it just, when you lit a candle, there was light. Light was infinite. The problem with something being infinite is that you can't measure it. If you can't measure it, then you can't really do anything. You can't make any predictive models on it. You can't really do anything scientific with it because it's not measurable. Well, then in 1676, a Danish astronomer by the name of Ole Romer was doing some observation of the sun and the moons of Jupiter. And by doing that, he discovered that the speed of light was not instantaneous. So he started doing some experiments to actually measure what the speed of light is. And he found out that the light does have a discrete speed of about 186,000 miles per second. Very, very fast, but it's not, so it seems instant, but it's not, it has a discrete speed. And he presented his works to scientists, and unfortunately, just like with most things, he was rejected because contrary to what they like to say about themselves, scientists aren't really that open to new ideas. They're like anyone else. They don't want to be wrong. And if you've lived your whole life saying that it's instantaneous and infinite, and some guy comes along and says, nope, it's not, then you get out of here. You don't know what you're talking about. You're just one guy. But they eventually had to accept it because it was provable. The great thing about that is that with the speed of light having a discrete speed and being measurable, it opened up the entire world of physics. All of our modern physics is based on the idea that the speed of light is measurable and constant. And that led to some of the great physicists of the last few hundred years, like Niels Bohr and Max Planck and Heisenberg and Einstein, and all these great physicists. And so all of our physics is based on the speed of light and it being a constant. In fact, the famous equation, E equals mc squared, energy equals mass times the speed of light squared, c being the speed of light. Famous equation. Is totally germane to all the things we do in physics. The model of Niels Bohr's model of the atom that I was talking about before was only able to be created using the predictive models of the speed of light. So all of our physics is based on that. Okay. Fast forward to 1988. A couple of scientists from Australia named Trevor Norman and Barry Setterfield make a startling discovery. They discovered that the speed of light is not constant, that it's actually slowing down. Now, yeah, minute, in a very, very minute, discrete in very minute and discrete ways. Not something that you would have to change your daily schedule over. But again, it is slowing down predictably, measurably, again, minutely, and logarithmically. Logarithmically, I mean by that over time, the change in speed is going to be dramatic, more dramatic than it is now. So, but again, as I said, it's not something that you would notice. You wouldn't think, you know what? Speed of light's faster than it was yesterday. No, it's not. It's not done at that stage, at that level. It's very minute. And this is something you can look up. You can Google speed of light slowing down. However, if you do that, they're going to actually attribute it to some Eastern European scientists and from the late 1990s. They don't give Norman and Setterfield their due. You'd have to, if you specifically Google speed of light slowing down, Setterfield or Norman, then you will come into some of their work, but it's not promoted. And I think the reason is that Setterfield and Norman were both Christians. They were both religious men, and some of the conclusions that they came to with their models kind of fly in the face of secular science, so they don't want to promote it. But science acknowledges that the speed of light is slowing down. The thing is, that should have been a huge story. The idea that the speed of light is slowing down should have been the biggest story in physics of the last 100 years, because again, all of our physics is based on it being a constant. If it's not a constant, then that literally changes everything. So why is this not promoted more? Why isn't this taught more in schools? And I think the reason is that the speed of light changing actually ruins some scientific models, what we'll talk about. But so I want to get back to the spiritual realm. But in order to do that, here's where I want to go with this. If the speed of light is slowing down, then that means that next year, technically, the speed of light will be slower than it was this year. Again, not by a huge amount, very minute. It wouldn't really affect things one way or the other. But that also means that last year it would have been minutely faster. Yeah, it doesn't affect things. So 100 years ago, it would have been a bit faster, but again, you wouldn't. It's not something that your parents would say. In my day, light was a little faster. But as I said, it happens logarithmically. So when you go back a lot of years, things can change dramatically. So if you go back 2,000 years to the time of Christ, it's estimated that the speed of light would have been 100 times faster than it is today. What would that mean? Well, before I get to, instead of talking about what that would mean, let's go back even further. Let's go back to about 8,000 years, when the time that we would consider, ancient times, the times of ancient civilizations. It's estimated if the curve is constant, the speed of light would have been about 10,000 times faster than it is now. Okay,
Wow.
so how would that affect our physical world? It's really hard to say, but I mean, I think you could say that because the electrons are subject to the speed of light, and that they create the electric field that gives us the illusion of solidity, then I think you could argue that the world would have been denser. Our material world would have been more solid, more substantive. But I think what's more important, more interesting, is how it would have affected us mentally, because our thoughts are electric. Okay, so when we think, there is an electric spark that goes between our neural cells. That's what is measured when you hooked up to an EKG. It's measuring that energy. So if the speed of light was thousands of times faster, then that means that that energy between our neurons would have been going thousands of times faster, meaning our thoughts would have been thousands of times faster. We would have had much, much, much faster brains. Our perceptions would have been much greater. So maybe this is why the ancient people believed in the so-called gods, the Elohim. Could it be that because their brains were so much faster than ours, that they were able to perceive them in a way that we cannot? And could it be maybe the reason that we don't experience the supernatural in the way the ancient people did is not because the supernatural isn't happening, but maybe it's just because we can't perceive it, because our brains are much slower. We always have this idea that the ancients were, dumb. They were, knuckle dragging troglodytes. But I think it's the opposite. I think they were much, much smarter than us. They did things that we still can't explain. The pyramids, Göbekli Tepe, all these unbelievable ancient structures that we can't recreate to this day.
Wow, what an interesting theory. I've never heard that before.
Yeah. So another thing that I think is interesting, again, I can't prove this, but another person, I forget her name now, she had a supposition that before the Tower of Babel incident, you know the story from the Bible that they were building the tower to reach the heavens, and but this wasn't about height. It was not because they thought God was in the sky. They were basically making a ziggurat. They were making a portal to get into the spiritual realm, which I'm gonna get back to. But then God confused their languages. What does that mean? Some people started speaking Spanish, others were speaking, German and Persian or whatever. Her supposition was that before the Tower of Babel, we were communicating telepathically. Our minds were so fast that we could actually read each other's thoughts, and so why do we have mouths? And the thought was that the sounds of vibrations from our mouths could actually move objects physically, that these heavy stones that built the pyramids, where if you change the frequency of them, they can become lighter or heavier, and that's how they move the stones around. I just thought that was really, really fascinating stuff.
Yeah.
So that's one of the ideas, is that the ancients were able to perceive the spiritual realm in ways that we could not. And that's why they all had stories of the gods, and not because they were not smart and they were trying to make stuff up to explain their world, but they actually interacted. They encountered these entities. They could perceive them, and we can't. And that's actually a handicap that we have. And so because we can't perceive the spiritual, we have to default to just being in the material world.
Wow. You're blowing my mind.
So let me explain what I think what the spiritual realm is.
Okay.
And so, of course, I default to God. And I do that not just because, well, that's what I was brought to believe, but with faith by reason, I actually use reason to explain what God is. And that's why I brought up the model of the atom before. Because how does the Bible say that our physical world came into existence? Because God spoke it into existence. God said, "Let there be," and then there was. He used words. What do we say that the atom is at the subatomic, at the quark level? It's vibrations.
Vibration. Mhm.
What are words? Words are
Vibration.
vibrations, and they're order. We live in an orderly universe, which is one of the many reasons why I reject the naturalistic evolutionary paradigm, because it says the opposite. It says that we things went from chaos to order, which isn't possible. It violates the second law of thermodynamics, which states the opposite. We go from order to chaos. Things lose energy over time. It doesn't gain energy and become more orderly. Over time, things become chaotic. I think we can. Our own homes are a evidence of that. You clean up your house, what happens? Does it become more orderly over time, or does it become more chaotic over time? No, things go from order to chaos. And so, excuse me, sorry, got that phone was going. Okay. So when you have so what are words? Words are orderly vibrations. So that's why I believe it, because it actually meets what we know about quantum physics, and it's the only faith system that says that orderly vibrations, words, created our universe. Everything else gives you, every other creation narrative gives you a different story, a different narrative about how things came about. But this one matches actual science. The Bible matches. That's why I believe it. So what can we know about God? And I'm doing a series right now on the book of Genesis. Just started it. I'm a couple episodes in. I'll have a third one published pretty soon. But we in the episode I'm working on right now, I'm trying to get into, what can we say about the God of the Bible? Well, one thing we can say about him is that when we go to the book of First John 1:5, it says that God is light, and there is no darkness in him at all. So that means 100% light, infinite light. What is light? Light is energy. God's called a consuming fire.
Hey Ohana, I hope you're loving this conversation as much as I am. I just wanted to pause for a quick moment to ask for your support. If you're enjoying what you're hearing and feel like we've earned it, We'd be so grateful if you could leave us a rating or review. Your honest feedback really helps us grow and reach more people who love exploring these fascinating topics. And if you think this episode would resonate with someone you know, don't forget to share it with them. Mahalo nui loa for being part of our journey. Now, back to the show.
God's called a consuming fire. It's energy. So he made a realm. When he says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, he created the spiritual realm and the physical realm. The spiritual realm was not spoken into existence, but it's where he resides. So that has to be a realm of energy. And if it came into existence without words, that means it came into existence through thought. So that's why I believe that the spiritual realm is energy and consciousness. And that is the world we are a simulation of. So I'll let you talk a bit now.
No, yeah, no, I'm just taking everything in. So the simulation world and the light, and if it was 1,000 or 10,000 times faster before, does that mean that the time changed? Or
Possibly.
does, oh,
And that's one of the reasons why uh, the scientists don't really want to acknowledge the changing of the speed of light, because the way that they measure time and they date things is based on the speed of light being constant.
mm,
So things like carbon dating, argon
mhm.
dating, they all are reliant on this constant speed.
Wow,
If the speed is not constant, then you cannot definitively say how old something is unless you factor that into it.
that's
So
interesting. So
yeah,
that would mean, I should say, could that mean the pyramid is older than what, obviously, I think there's a lot of people that argue the fact that it's older anyway, but could this be proof?
yeah, it could mean they're older. It also could mean they're younger.
Really?
Yeah,
Younger.
because
Interesting.
because if things are, because the rate, the carbon dating is radioactive decay, and they're just looking at, okay, it's decaying at this rate. If it always decayed at this rate, then we can predictably say it's this old. But if the speed of light is faster, then that means either that decay is much faster or much slower, depending on. I mean, I'm not a physicist, so I'm just giving my supposition here. It could mean that decay was happening, much faster, so which means that things will be much younger.
That's interesting. Okay.
So yeah, so it's hard. You cannot definitively give the age, and that's what Setterfield and Norman were proposing, that things that we think are really ancient may not be as ancient as we think. Maybe
Hmm.
instead of millions of years, it's only thousands of years.
Hmm. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. 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 I'll let you finish.
Okay. Um, I think that's the crux. So with consciousness, it it opens up a different realm of understanding for us because of the kind of beings that we are. What are we? We are human beings, but we are a consciousness as well. And our consciousness is what's eternal. How do we know it's eternal? Well, we have to look at what physical time is. Physical time, according to relativity, affects and is affected by mass acceleration and gravity. So in order to be affected by time, you have to have mass. Well, our bodies have mass. Some of us have a little more mass than we'd like, but uh, the but your consciousness does not have mass.
Hmm.
It doesn't. If you so in our minds are made up of information and of that light of consciousness. It doesn't have a weight to it. When someone dies, they don't suddenly weigh significantly less than they did when they were alive. So but they're no longer thinking. Their mind is no longer in that body. So if your mind, if your brain, if your thoughts, the real you, is not physical, if it's spiritual, then it's not subject to physical time, meaning that we are all eternal. The real you is not the person I'm seeing here on the screen.
Hmm.
The real you are your thoughts, your memories, your emotions, your personality. That's the real you. I
Hmm.
could get to know the real you without ever seeing you.
Mhm.
So that's the real you, and that real you is eternal, which is good news or bad news depending on where you're going to spend that eternity, because we're not
Mm.
always going to be in these physical bodies on this physical realm. The point of that is that our consciousness exists in the consciousness realm. So we have one foot in both worlds, as it were. We live in this physical world, but we also exist in the spiritual world. We're a hybrid of those two. And because of that, we have the ability to affect both worlds. And that gets into the idea of again of how creation happened. What did God do to create the world? He spoke into the spiritual realm, and it manifested in the physical realm. So that's a spiritual law. If you speak into one realm, it can manifest in the other. So we can do the same thing. We can speak in our physical realm, and it manifests in the realm of the heavens. That's what we do when we pray. What are we doing? We are speaking words that we hope will manifest in the spiritual realm. And since the spiritual realm is the real realm, it's the realm that is the true substantive realm. That's the realm we should be focused on. So this
Yeah.
again explains why, how God created the world, how He created the universe, and how we can interact with Him. And also it explains how we can make changes in our world based on the way we think and the way we behave. And so it gets a little woo woo there. And sometimes some of my Christian audience are like, "Hey, slow down! You're starting to sound new agey," and I'm not. But what I'm saying is that we need to understand that there are spiritual laws that exist, and they aren't arbitrary. That's why I brought in the science aspect of it first,
Mm.
because I want people to understand that these aren't just things that are made up. I mean, faith by reason is really all about understanding our faith based on analysis and understanding and things like that. So when we understand that, at the smallest level, we are light, and that our world is made up of light and vibrations, and it's an electric simulation, then that means that our world is really more or less energy. It's more, and that energy is a simulation of a realm of consciousness. So if we can um, um, dwell in that realm and understand who we are in that realm, then I think that can help us not only affect our world and the way we interact with each other, but it can also let us know what our destiny is.
Do
And
you believe we have a destiny? When you say destiny, is that pre-programmed?
oh, no, no, no. When I say destiny, I mean where we'll spend eternity. I think that once
Oh,
we
okay.
are outside of these physical bodies, then we will dwell in one of two places, either in the presence of God or outside of the presence of God. But
Mm.
that's our choice.
Mm.
And that we need to stay focused on what's going on in that realm. And that's when I look at the Bible and Christianity through the spiritual lens, and not just our physical world. I look at the Bible through what God's intent for us was, why He
What do you
created us. and,
think?
and and the reason He created us, again, is because I believe He wanted to have fellowship with us. He wanted to interact with us. And we look at what did God do when He first created Adam and Eve. He basically gave them two broad categories of things to do. One, He said, rule the world. This is yours. You're made in my image, meaning we bear, well, Adam and Eve anyway bear the image of God. So creation would obey them. They're to multiply, have kids. And then in the cool of the day, God said, walk and talk with me. We saw in chapter 3, which is the chapter, Genesis chapter 3, the chapter on original sin. And when Adam and Eve sinned, they hid. But it said that God was walking in the garden in the cool of the day. He was looking for them, like, where are you guys? This is what we do. You guys rule the world during the day. You do your thing. You're the king and queen of the earth. And we're supposed to be walking and talking and exchanging ideas and thoughts. And they weren't there. And I think God was heartbroken by that. The point is that He made us to fellowship with Him. He made us because He wanted, because I get the question, well, if God is complete and perfect, why did He make us? Well, if you have everything, if you're perfect, the one thing you can want is more of what you already have. And so I think he wanted more consciousness. He wanted more people to interact with. He wanted unique stories. We're all unique individuals, and we all have a unique perspective on life. We have a unique story, and God wants to hear those stories. He wants to fellowship with us. He wants to interact with us. That's why He made us. We keep screwing it up. But if you look at the beginning of the book and the end of the book, we see the same situation. In the beginning of the book, perfect world, and we have perfect fellowship with God. Then middle of the book, we screw up, At the end of the book, in the very last chapter of Revelation, we see that God dwells with us again, and we're in a perfect environment, and we fellowship with him for eternity, and we fellowship with each other. We bring all of our uniqueness to each other, and other people bring their uniqueness to us, and we can just continue to grow and learn and fellowship and just and grow for eternity. And I think that's a beautiful thing.
Yeah. Does he still talk to us today?
Yes, he
How
absolutely
does he
talks.
talk? How does he talk to us through the Bible or?
That's one of the ways, but he also speaks to us. If you are a Christian, part of our Christian doctrine, Christian philosophy is that when you accept Christ, the Spirit of God, the Holy Spirit, comes to live inside of you and gives you guidance. Jesus said that himself, that, once I leave, as he says after his death and resurrection, once I leave, I ascend to heaven, I will send the Holy Spirit to you, and he will guide you into all things. And that's what he does. So he gives us guidance as a Christian by speaking to us through our heart, through our hearts. And that's how he speaks to us now. Now, God has spoken to us in different ways throughout the ages. I think he spoke directly to Adam and Eve, and I think he still spoke directly during the antediluvian or pre-flood era. Um, but we kept screwing up, so we had to keep making adjustments. And I think then he spoke to us through the law, through the nation of Israel, which he established. And he said, I will, he told Abraham, I will bless those who bless you and curse those who curse you. So you're going to be my mouthpiece, you and the nation that comes from you and your genealogy. And that's how that's why he established the written word, the Bible. And then when Jesus came, Jesus became a man and he dwelt among us. And then when he left, he said, I'm going to leave you with the Holy Spirit who will communicate to you. So that's why we don't hear the booming voice of God as we imagine it, because in this era, he says, I'm going to dwell inside of you and I'm going to give you moment by moment instruction if you are willing to follow it.
That's really cool.
So I think he speaks to us through his Holy Spirit. He speaks to us through the Bible. He speaks to us through other people who have a fellowship with him. And that's
Yeah.
what I like to do. I'm hoping that what I'm speaking to folks right now, that this is, hopefully I'm doing it the right way, and I'm communicating some things that God may want the people listening here to know.
Yeah, absolutely. And I read through some of your blog and you mentioned the idea of feeling like, I guess, life is a pre-scripted path. Why do you think so many people follow this pre-scripted path without even questioning its meaningfulness?
What do you mean by prescriptive path?
They just go through the mundanes of life.
Hmm.
They just go through, I think you mentioned, they just go to school and they,
Oh, right.
those things, a mundane life, they just go through life, but they're not even satisfied.
No, they are, because I think the reason we aren't satisfied is because we know that we are made for something greater than this.
Mm.
We, if you go to my website, faithbyreason.net, there's at the very top, there's a link that says start here. And I start the first series I do there, a series of blogs and podcasts, are answering the question that we all have. Like, what's the point? What's the purpose of existence? What's the meaning of life? We all have that question, no matter what your background, whether you're Christian, atheist, Jew, Muslim, Hindu, whatever. We all want to know why we're here, and we don't. Like you said, we go through our lives wondering about that and not having that question answered, and it bothers us. And so those first few, like dozen or so posts and podcasts, are really giving you the my attempt to give you the answer as to why we're here. And I think the reason we don't necessarily seek it is because maybe we don't know where to seek it, or we don't focus on the spiritual. We just focus on our material lives, because that's what we're told. That's what we're taught. We're taught, again, you go to school, you get a good job, you marry the person that you're meant to be with, you have some kids, and then you get them out of the house through college, and then you retire, and then you just kind of you fade away. No one thinks that's a great way to live. There's no one who says that that's the meaning of life. So we keep searching for it. And if you give up searching for it, well, then that's where you're probably going to have a pretty miserable life. But most of us are looking for it someplace. And so some of us look for it through the church. Some of it look for it through the new age. or through some kind of purpose. That's why people pursue what they pursue, be it something as high level as spirituality, or even on the lower end with like sports. I know people who are obsessed with their sports team. I know folks who dress like their favorite sports team, and that's all they think about. That's what they focus on. That's what they obsess over because they need a purpose. They need a higher purpose. Everyone needs that, and you're going to find it someplace. And the preference is God's purpose is that you find it through Him. But if you don't, you're going to look and try to find your meanings someplace else. Maybe it's money. Some people are just obsessed with gaining as much money as possible. But even that's hollow because you can't take it with you, as they say. You can enjoy life for a while with money, but it doesn't bring you comfort. And at the end of the day, you're still miserable. I know people who are very wealthy who are completely unhappy because they have everything that the world says should make them happy, yet they still aren't. And they're like, well, I don't know what else to do. Or
Yeah.
maybe you're trying to get as much sex from the opposite sex or same sex, depending on your preference, as possible. And you go but even when you do that, you're still not going to be fulfilled because you're trying to get something else. You're trying to find meaning in life outside of yourself. You're trying to find meaning of life outside of your creator. And if you try to do that, you're always going to be miserable.
So, if someone is feeling lost or disconnected, what's the first step that they can take to start exploring life's bigger questions?
Um, well, again, mine is to go to the website and start exploring it that way. Because again, I ask the essential questions. For the first thing I ask is, what is existence? How do we know that we exist? What is existence made of? I talk about some of the atomic structures and things like that. What can we know about how the universe came into existence? I mean, either the universe is finite or is infinite. If it was infinite, well, that's not possible because it would have experienced a heat death by now because again, second law of thermodynamics, over time things lose energy. So we know that the universe is finite, meaning it had a definitive beginning. Well, how did it begin? Well, there had to be a first cause, a cause with no precedent causes because there's no infinite regression. Okay, so something caused the universe. What can we know about the first cause? And I go through what we can know about that first cause based on just our human understanding. And I get to the limit of that. And once we get to the limit of human understanding, then anything else we know about the first cause would have to come from the first cause itself. What does the first cause say about itself? What does the first cause give reason? Because and that's how I think that if you have these questions, it would inevitably get you to God. And so people might ask, well, how do I know that the God of the Bible is the first cause? Good question. And I use the process of elimination because by looking at what could have caused the universe. So we know that the first cause has to be causality tells us that for every effect there's a cause, and the cause is greater than and independent of the effect. So if the universe is an effect, then whatever caused the universe has to be greater than the universe, and outside of it, it has to be transcendent. So is it's a creator in your religious worldview? Is he transcendent? If not, then you have to eliminate it. So any religious system that says that the universe was created from inside the universe, that these pantheons of gods created the universe, well, you got to eliminate those. You also have to eliminate atheism right off the bat because we know from the first law of thermodynamics that matter and energy cannot be created or destroyed naturally. Well, we have matter and energy that were created, and there was a time when they didn't exist because the universe is finite. And so, however they came into existence, they cannot come into existence naturally. They could have only come into existence supernaturally. So the creator was supernatural and transcendent, and it's information. Everything we have is information. Our DNA is information. Everything is orderly information. It's a very orderly universe. So you have to have the origin of information. What kind of information is causeless? I would say it's principles, specifically qualitative and quantitative principles. The qualitative principle is right. Something's either right or it's not right. There's no precedent. There's nothing that precedes that. Then you have the quantitative, which is justice. Justice means that over time things equal out. That's a principle. So whatever the first cause is, from our understanding, would have to be right and just. And since it's the original cause of everything, that first cause would have to be always and completely right and just. So out of all the faith systems, which one presents the creator as outside of the universe, as supernatural, as always and completely right and just? That leaves us basically with the God of the Bible, because it's also singular, the first call. So any pantheon of gods, you got to eliminate those. You have to eliminate atheism, and even Islam. Although Islam is monotheistic, Allah is presented as capricious. Allah can lie. It says in the Quran that he can lie. In fact, and so lying isn't right and just. So that unfortunately eliminates him. That leaves us with the Judeo-Christian God. And as I said, he's the only one who is in his creation narrative, spoke the world into existence, used ordered vibrations, which again meets with what we know about quantum physics. So those are the reasons why I believe that this God is the first cause, and that's who you should seek. And you should get to know who he is, because there's a reason behind it. And that's what my whole purpose with Faith by Reason is all about, helping Christians understand who this entity is and what he wants from us.
Yeah, your podcast, you talk, well, right now, I think you're doing the Genesis series. You just got done the Revelation series
Yep.
recently, and
Went
now
to
you're
the end,
doing,
from the end to the beginning.
wow. That's awesome. So, that's a good place to start too for a lot of people. I think they can listen to your podcast where you talk and you break down
Right, a podcast and the
Genesis.
video series. I did the Revelation video series. Was several years in the making. There's 60 episodes,
Wow.
and the reason I started with that is because I think people believe it or not, have an easier time with Revelation than they do with Genesis.
Yeah.
Because I think deep down we all know that we're due for a reckoning. We know this world isn't going to last forever, and it
Yeah.
seems to be winding down. Things
Yeah.
seem to be, unfortunately, getting worse and worse. And there's going to be a point where, again, there has to be a reckoning. You don't have to convince anyone that this world is due for a judgment. And
Mm.
it's in pop culture. You look at movies. There are tons of movies about apocalyptic things happening and judgments, and sometimes it's these like the zombie apocalypse or all these different things. But the point is that it's a very popular end of the world stuff. It's a very popular genre. So I started with that because I figured it would resonate with people. And then I went to go back to the beginning so that they see how they relate. Because again, at the very end of the book, what is God doing? God has redeemed the world. Those who chose evil have been voluntarily, by their own choice, separated themselves from God, and that's how they will spend eternity separate from God. And then those who wanted to be with God, they get exactly what God wanted in the very first place, which was to be with us, to dwell with us, to have a fellowship with us, which he did. And if you believe in the salvation message of Jesus, that's how you are qualified to be in his presence, because he is perfect. He's light, and there's no darkness in him at all. Again, 1 John 1:5. So you can't have any darkness in you at all in order to dwell in his presence. Well, we're not perfect on our own. That's why we need the redemption that is provided through the cross, through Christ. He takes on our sin. He lived a sinless life, and he was killed unjustly, which means that by justice, God had to give him his life back. And because he showed that he would never sin during his life, then he had to give him back infinite life, meaning infinite life he could share with infinite amount of people. And that's the kind of the mechanics briefly of what salvation is. And so now at the end, he has people who are not sinful, who are dwelling with him and fellowshipping with him. The same thing he has at the beginning in Genesis. And so at the end of the book, he gets what he wanted at the beginning of the book. So now I'm going back to the beginning of the book to show how we get to what happens at the end. Because the interesting thing about Genesis is that the entire story of the Bible is in Genesis. I would argue that the rest of the Bible is just commentary on what happens in Genesis, because all the principles of the Bible are there. All the principles of what God wants, his will, is all there. And then everything else is commentary on Genesis.
I think you're right. Yeah, I think you're right on that. Wow. Ed, I really thank you so much for your time today and sharing your fascinating insights with us. And I really hope to have you come back because there's so much more
No problem.
questions that I have. I mean, I want to respect your time,
Yeah.
and I appreciate you taking the time for us. But before we wrap up, where can our listeners find you and your work, and how can they connect with you?
Sure. So the best way is to go to my website, faithbyreason.net. That's where all of my material is. And you can also go to YouTube. I think I'm at Faith by Reason 883. I'm not sure what the 883 is there for, but that's the designation they gave me. Or you can just look up Faith by Reason, and my video should pop up there. Also on Rumble, Faith by Reason there. I have some stuff I put up on X, the former Twitter. But yeah, but faithbyreason.net is probably the best place to go.
Awesome.
Yeah, and
Thank
make
you.
sure not .com, .net, because the .com is owned by somebody else. So
Oh,
they probably
okay.
using .net, N-E-T.
Okay, I will put that link in the show notes.
Great.
Well, Ed, mahalo for joining us again and sharing your time and your wisdom. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on this show, and I
Okay.
really do hope you come back. I thank you so
Yeah.
much.
Yeah. Let me know what questions you that are
Oh, I got a
percolating.
lot.
Yeah.
I hope we could talk maybe something on Revelation
Sure. Oh, happy to.
or or any other topics that you want to talk about. Because at least this is an introduction to you, and now the listeners know you and a little bit about you, and then we can get right into the meat of everything on the next one. And that brings us to an end of another episode. A big mahalo to our special guest, Ed Mabrie, for sharing his fascinating insights on the speed of light and how it ties into the bigger question about existence and faith. If you've enjoyed this conversation, don't forget to follow, subscribe, and leave a 5-star review if you think we've earned it. And please share this episode with your ohana because it helps to grow our ohana here. Thanks again, guys, and see you the next time. Take care, happy holidays, mahalo, and ahui ho kako. Bye.